welcome to this evening's ThinkIn on the Oscars. The technical title is What Films Should Have Won the Oscar, singular, but I think we'll range more broadly. It's tremendous to be in the newsroom and to welcome everyone online as well. I'm Matt Dancona, I'm an editor at Tortoise, and hopefully in the next hour we can review some of the history of the Academy Awards in anticipation of the weekend's 94th Academy Awards at the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles. What should have won, maybe discuss a little bit about what should win this year, and also look at some of the things that you saw on the slides about the poll that we did of Tortoise members about their own ideas and what they think should have won in the past. In the chat, policing everything will be my colleague Kat Whitfield, so do chip in if you want to speak up on the issues we're discussing. We're very fortunate to have two tremendous guest speakers today, and I'm afraid, fanboying them absurdly before we went live. We have Alison Owen, who's a BAFTA-winning producer and responsible for some just amazing movies. I can't list them all because we'd be here all day, but from Brick Lane, Jane Eyre, Saving Mr. Banks, Suffragette, Tulip Fever, and How to Build a Girl. The list goes on. She's had a prodigious career in film and really, created some of the true classics of our time. And Tim Richards, who's sort of, I think, in his own way, is responsible for most of my social life because he's founder and CEO of View Entertainment. And I was at View on Monday watching the 4K restoration of Shawshank, which is fantastic. And he's also chairman of the British Film Institute, which I describe as my second university, and I love very much, and was there the other day watching Julia Jim, and we were just discussing Flair. So thank you very much, Tim, for my life. So I'm going to plunge straight in, and I don't know, Kat, if you can put up on screen some of the slides of what the members had to say about films that ought to have won and didn't, because they're very, very revealing and tell you quite a bit about people's attitudes. Anyway, while we're doing that, while we're wrestling with the technical glitch, craft services glitch, let me go to each of you first as a sort of starter for 10, with your top Oscar injustices, just the kind of the times when, and some of them are famous, some less so, when the film that should have won or the performer that should have won didn't. Let's start with you, Tim. What are your top miscarriages of justice at the Academy Awards?
You're gonna take it from me. No, I think by the time films have reached that stage to a nomination, they're great films. You can probably point your finger to a few exceptions, but I think at that point it becomes very subjective. I mean, it shades of gray in terms of which one you would think, because I was refreshing and going back over 20 years. And of best films at the Oscars, and I actually agreed with 10 of the 20 years. Those are ones that I would have picked and gone for myself. And bizarrely, there are some years, it feels like every 3 or 4 years, there seems to be a collection of really good movies. Shape of Water and Billboards, there's a few films like that you kind of think, how do you decide between them? And it's really, really challenging. It is so subjective. So, I mean, I don't know if I would even characterize it as an injustice because, one person's injustice is another person's. What
characterizes justice? Yeah.
So I think, like if you were to ask me in terms of what I would have done differently here, I can point to a number of films that I would have selected over other films in a particular year. But I'm sure there's somebody else on the other side that would have a counterpoint to that as well. So, but that's the beauty of the medium. That is it. I mean, it is a lot of things to a lot of people.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at some of the classic miscarriages, so-called, I mean, one that's often cited is 77, when Rocky won Best Picture, which is now remembered with a kind of sentimental or that something so small conquered. It was a David and Goliath moment.
What did it beat out?
Well, that's the point. It beat Network, Taxi Driver, and All the President's Men. So suddenly, the reframing of that. I mean, as much as we all love Rocky, and it's a joy of a movie.
I was all set to defend Rocky there for a second.
Exactly. I mean, Rocky then really only stands out as against all the other Rockies, rather than. So I mean, there's that, and people often talk about Pulp Fiction and Shawshank losing out to Forrest Gump in '95, Goodfellas losing to Dances with Wolves in 1991, Toy Story, which has become a kind of staple of classic film, not nominated for Best Picture. It won some extraordinary, and I think that, possibly the kind of acme year in this respect, 2019, when Green Book won, and in the mix were, wait for it, Black Klansman, A Star Is Born, Roma, The Favourite, Black Panther, and Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, how you come up with Green Book as being the best film from that lot, I do not know. But this, of course, I suppose represents partly the voting system, doesn't it? Which is a preferential system where.
So you get sort of split vote, and then.
Yeah, you end up.
The most neutral is the one that rises to the top.
So just to explain to people who haven't seen the technicalities of the voting system, in most of the categories at the Oscars, it's a first past the post thing. Whoever wins the most votes wins. But in the Best Picture, because it's such a controversial category, there's a preferential voting system, which means you rank all your films, and as a film is knocked out, the second choices are reallocated to another film until a film gets 50%, which means that the film that wins often has a broader support, but doesn't necessarily thrill anyone. So that's the risk of that particular system. So, Alison, you've had a little while to mug up. What are your favourite disasters?
Well, I think, like Tim said, that there's some things are just disasters because your favourite didn't win. And there's examples of that. I would say, you've just looked at mugging up on Tim's list, that you look at the King's Speech beating out Social Network, and for me, Social Network is a work of towering genius, and it's brilliant. But you can also see the appeal of the King's Speech for a lot of people. It's moving, it's emotional, it's commercial, it intersects between kind of art movies and commercial movies, which is something people reach for all the time, and it's quite difficult to get to. So whilst I would not agree with that verdict, I also wouldn't call it an injustice, because I also quite like King's Speech, and I can see why a lot of people would vote for that. I think there are some years where there's clearly an injustice and a failure of that system that you just talked about. I mean, how Crash could win over Brokeback Mountain is just a travesty. So sometimes I think it's a clear travesty rather than just a difference. Mostly it's just a difference of opinion. But sometimes you're just like, what the actual just happened?
Well, I think actually when Jack Nicholson pulled the card out of the envelope, he pretty much did that face you just did, which was, and the winner is Crash. I mean, there was a Nicholson question mark at the end of it. So I think he spoke for the planet at that moment.
Yeah,
it was an extraordinary moment.
And I think when that happens as well, everybody sort of knows it as well.
Yes.
I think everyone knew that night that Brokeback Mountain should have won it.
Yes.
And and sometimes that happens not just with best film, but also that there's often a sort of swell of voting for one film, and so performances that are really great get swept away because everyone's just voting for one film. And I would say that happens to my film. On my personal experience, when the year that Elizabeth, which I produced, was up against Shakespeare in Love, and Shakespeare in Love clearly was getting the groundswell of popular opinion, and we didn't expect to win Best Film. It was in the years actually when there were only 5 Best Films, so we were thrilled to be in that 5 and didn't expect to win. But we were really hoping that Kate would get Best Actress, but she didn't, because everyone sort of went tick, 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 tick for Shakespeare in Love and voted for Gwyneth. Now, Gwyneth's a friend of mine, and I love her dearly, but even Gwyneth came over on that night in tears to Kate going, you should have won, you should have won. It's me, your girl should have won, this is so wrong. Because everybody sort of, some things are just patently obvious that was a historical, amazing career-defining performance from Kate. And
It's interesting you mentioned that year because a lot of Oscar historians cite that as one of the most important years, a sort of punctuation mark, because in fact the Harvey Weinstein machine, R.I.P., was at its height then, wasn't it? And Saving Private Ryan, which was assumed to be, if not a shoo-in, then certainly the hot favourite, the hot ticket to win, didn't. And Shakespeare in Love, which while being a charming and delightful film, was a charming and delightful film.
yeah, I mean, it's a great move, and I wasn't sorry to lose to
No, sure.
But I felt for Kate.
I mean, the question I'd like to ask both of you is, it's been interesting. We do a Creative Sensemaker weekly newsletter on matters cultural, which we just filed today, and I think Kat will put the link or has put the link in the chat. And in researching it, I was fascinated to discover that even though people badmouth the Oscars now and describe them as Jurassic and part of the analog era and no one wants to watch them and all the rest of it, even Netflix, which is supposed to be the great disruptor, the digital disruptor of Tinseltown, has been ploughing millions into ensuring, and has a team of 40 working around the clock to ensure that the power of the dog sweeps the board. So I'd love to hear from both of you about how the campaigns work. How in 2022, how is the campaign sort of system operating, and has it changed? Tim, why don't you...
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is the year of kind of the battle of the subscription services with Apple and Netflix, Power of the Dog, and Coda, and I think you can see the ramp up right now. I mean, they're spending huge amounts of money, but I think Netflix have been desperate for an award for a long time. And they have spent a lot of money over the years. They've come close. They thought they were going to get it with Roma, and they didn't. But I think this year it's going to be interesting what happens. I think the momentum now appears to be going with Coda. So it's. Can
you say a little bit about Coda, because in fact relatively few people have seen Coda.
Yeah, I mean, Coda, if you haven't seen it, it's an extraordinary film. It takes place. It's a small family film. Coda is children of deaf adults. I think that's what it stands for. And it's a woman who's born into a deaf family. So her parents and her brother are all deaf, and they're fishermen. And she has to be part of the boat for security reasons and for legal reasons. And it turns out that she's got a gift for singing. And I don't want to say too much more because if you haven't seen it, but it's a coming of age movie, and there is an absolutely spectacular scene where she's singing, and her parents have snuck in to this high school auditorium to watch her sing and perform. And she gives this incredible performance, and her family can't hear her. And suddenly, the director cuts the sound, and you go into her parents' head for a second. And what they're doing is they're looking around the audience to gauge the audience's reaction to help judge how they should react about how their daughter is singing. And it's just spectacularly well done. It reminded me a little bit of the scene in Babel, where I don't know if you've seen Babel, another incredible film, but there's a scene in there where there's in Japan, in Tokyo, and there's a Japanese girl who goes into a nightclub, and she's also deaf. And they cut out all the sound completely, and you enter into her world, and she has to watch other people dance and move in order to kind of get the feeling herself. So that scene was kind of replicated a little bit in Coda. But I mean, Coda is just one of these incredibly well-made films, and did well at BAFTA. Probably deserved to do a little bit better, but it just feels like it's picking up momentum right now.
Yeah.
And I think Jane Campion, who I absolutely love, and I loved Power of the Dog. I thought it was an extraordinary film, and I loved Belfast as well. So I think it's for me, it's those three. If I had, for BAFTA, I chose Belfast for a lot of reasons. I thought it was an extraordinary film. But I think right now it's the problem with Power of the Dog is that it's a Netflix film, And in order to qualify now in the U.S. for the Oscars, they're calling it this temporary epidemic qualification, but it is 6 cities for 7 days on the screen. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a nonsense because you can do that with anybody anywhere. So they've really opened the door right up. Whether they keep going with that is yet to be seen. But but this is a film that you need to see on a big screen.
Yeah.
I mean, there are these incredible panoramic scenes, and it is New Zealand standing in for Montana. Bizarrely, usually it's the other way around. But there's incredible mountain scenes, and Benedict Cumberbatch as a cowboy going out there, and you can't watch it on a TV. You can't. And I think it's unfortunate because it's a great film, and I think it would actually do better. The interesting thing about what's going on now with the Oscars is 27% of Americans, we don't have the data for the UK, but 27% of Americans have been to a cinema in the last 12 months. So, because of the epidemic, because of screens being closed, no one's really gone out. And no one knows any of these movies at all. The only one they know is West Side Story, because it's Spielberg, and probably most of them haven't seen it anyway. So it's kind of it's a really bizarre year this year, I think, and it's a really tough call generally. But I think my money is going to be on, I think, Coda right now to take the Best Picture.
Alison, can you explain to us as the producer who's seen all this in action? I mean, when the nominations were announced, I'm a massive Licorice Pizza fan. I worship at the shrine of Paul Thomas Anderson. It's totally idiosyncratic. I know. I was very delighted it's nominated. I knew it wasn't going to win, but I hope it will. But I don't think it will. I don't think it stands a chance, sadly. But we did have music from the film. Clarence Carter singing "Slip Away," just in homage to it. But it seemed that Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog was the front runner, and as Tim said, the Belfast was, Kenneth Branagh's Belfast stood a chance. West Side Story had some fans, but Coda was really nowhere at the start. How does it come about that a film, which is a gem, a minor gem, but has not really made a huge impact on the box office or really in the media beyond some critics raving about it, suddenly become, as it has in the last couple of weeks, a real threat to The Power of the Dog? I mean, what is actually going on behind the scenes, or is it simply an organic process?
I think it's partly organic, but I think it's partly the campaign. I mean, Coda is such a Miramax-y type film. I mean, I'm surprised Harvey hasn't broken out of Rikers Island to buy that film. It's got everything that Harvey would have just lost his shit over. It's got music, it's got deaf people, it's got choirs, it's got family, it's got emotion, it's just got everything that Harvey, and it's a remake of a French movie, which is one of Harvey's favourite things because you've already got a proven formula that you could just dial up for an English-speaking audience. So it's, and I guess the campaign, I don't think they've been doing a kind of Harvey campaign with it, because Harvey's stock in trade was a sort of dirty tricks campaign, and I think now people have to be much more subtle about their dirty tricks, or they do them in a different kind of way, because they're going to get caught out if it's too overt.
There aren't $30,000 goodie bags with Coda written on the side changing hands. I mean, this is because I am fascinated by the rapidity, or maybe, says Tim. I am, but it is
Apple.
It is Apple, and it is fascinating that it has stormed through. It's like watching a horse in the last furlong just come to the. It's going. I mean, it means that Sunday's going to be a lot more exciting.
Yeah, I don't know if they left it too late.
That's again a question to ask: is have they left it too late?
Whether they've left it too late or it just happened too late is sort of, I guess, up for debate. I feel like it. I mean, I think I don't know what I'd bet on between Power of the Dog and Coda. It could be either. Coda. If the Oscar voting had been 2 days later, I would have bet on Coda for sure. But I think it may just have come up that little bit too late, but we'll see.
I mean, it is. I mean, I was speaking to the producer of Coda earlier today, And Apple have not really, I mean, that's not their core business.
No.
Like, and that's the real difference between Apple and Netflix, because Netflix want an award desperately. And they are doing everything they can. Apple are a little bit more kind of laid back on it, and I don't think they've had that kind of, even though I agree with you, it's kind of like a Weinstein kind of thing, but it hasn't had that Weinstein campaign or anything.
I think it's done it
It's word of mouth,
done it itself.
organically.
It is a really great. It's a real crowd pleaser. You know, it hasn't had the benefit of being in lots of cinemas, but it is essentially a crowd pleaser. It is the King's Speech in terms of that you know, miraculous crossover from indie film to mainstream appeal. It's got all the ingredients in it, and it does it beautifully.
If it does win, and I think it will win, it's going to be, I think, transformational for Apple, because I think it's going to be a big wake-up call for Apple that they can do that kind of thing, because they are sitting on. I mean, they're on the verge right now of. I mean, they want to be a studio eventually.
Do they want to buy Netflix, do you think?
Well, I mean, that rumor's been around for a long time, but I think we'll get into it later, maybe later. No, but I mean, it is. I mean, Amazon just bought MGM,
Yes.
and they're probably going to get full regulatory approval very, very shortly, and so you can already see the beginnings of that happening. So and I think Netflix, in order to survive, is going to need to be a studio. They cannot continue with a single channel like they have right now. That's not sustainable. So I think you're going to see some big, big changes there in the future.
Just to go back to our friend, the Golden Statuette, Alison, how do you describe the condition of the Oscars? Because they've had some pretty rough times. The Oscars So White crisis in 2015 and 2016. Obviously, not a great period during the pandemic. How could they? And I noticed that the viewing audiences, in as much as that's an important metric, query, is it, on television have fallen spectacularly, although the advertising slots are still being sold. What would be your kind of diagnostic analysis of where the Oscars are at right now? I mean, do they have a healthy future ahead of them? Are there more reforms they need to push through?
I think they've got a healthy future ahead of them. I think the brand is strong, even though the audiences are dropping, but the audiences for any kind of television event like that are dropping because there's so many platforms and so much else to watch these days. But I think that the brand name is strong, and I think they actually reacted very well to the Oscars So White crisis, and I think they reacted much better than BAFTA did. And I think the chips have fallen, and they've rearranged themselves really well in a way that I think BAFTA's still suffering from an identity crisis.
For example, aren't they, as well? I mean, as well as the composition of the Academy itself.
Yes.
Movies that enter for, I think, Best Picture, I'm correct, have to have
sort of new rules,
representation
and
rules.
definitely the makeup of the Academy has transformed over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, Tim, is he an interesting question about the Oscars, which has been kind of underpinning all our discussion so far, has been the question of subjectivity, and that's always been there, of course. But I wonder what I mean, you know, with View, where you run, you know, extraordinary cineplexes where a whole variety of tastes are catered for, and one of the reasons we'll go there is because you respect the segmentation of the market. So my question to you, sort of with your View hat on, really, is it any longer meaningful to speak of the Best Picture? I mean, I'm not suggesting that the Oscars will stop having that category, but actually, has taste now become not just, you know, we all have our different subjective tendencies and styles and genres of films that we like, but actually, there really are silos of taste in movie making, and you know, over here you've got people for whom the 96th film in the MCU is the really important thing, and over here you've got people for whom Paris 13th District is the most important thing, and they coexist quite happily, but there really is almost no overlap.
Well, I mean, there's an audience for all films, and I think part of it is knowing your audience, knowing your customers. And I think one of the biggest misperceptions about multiplex cinemas, multiplex chains, is I think there's kind of this perception that we only play Marvel films. and no, we do, and I think, I mean, we have been using AI. We don't wave the flag, but we have AI that programs our cinemas, and because of that, and I just had our guys confirm that this morning before I came here tonight, we play 50% more films than anybody else. Because of that.
The number of titles you run.
Actual titles at any one time, and if you take a standard 6 or 7 plex, we play 50% more films, because when you've got extra screens, you can do that. And I think objectively, and I had this discussion last week with someone in the industry, I would argue there is no such thing as an art house cinema anymore. And there are probably about a dozen in the UK that I really like, that are true art house films. And I was having this discussion, and we kind of got into a big disagreement. And I said, give me the name of any art house cinema. Went right in, logged in, Batman, Sing 2. Literally, every single one. And that's what's happened with digital.
So you have to hand it to the Prince Charles.
But there are a few genuine ones,
yeah.
and the other ones play the same films. So, but I think though that, like, I mean, the Oscars are in the same way the BAFTAs are, and Sundance and all the other big awards at the festivals. They're a stamp of approval, and they'll help drive a film. They're not, I mean, if you look back at the Oscars, and when I was just kind of refreshing it, it's been 20 years since a commercial film, a commercially big film, which was
Return of the King, wasn't it?
It was Lord of the Rings. Thank you. Good one.
The third Return.
Yes, yeah, the final Lord of the Rings. Exactly right. And that was the last kind of big commercial film. And in 20 and 25 years ago, there were more commercial films, and for some reason, the Academy and voters and BAFTA as well have gravitated more towards smaller films, and those films don't always have an audience as well. And I think looking at them commercially, you know, what does an Oscar do? And I think there's been a lot of work done on this. I'd love to hear your side input too. But it is if the film is released at the same time as winning an Oscar, then it gets some legs, and it gets a little bit of a bump in business. The films that have done the best have been the films that were released just before winning an Oscar, and I guess because they get that marketing bump beforehand, and then they go. If the film was released 9-10 months ago, then it may be on other platforms, and people may have forgotten about it, and that big marketing bump, and it gets lost, even with an Oscar. You know, they may try and bring it back, but it's gone then. So it's really different. But it doesn't. It's more of a qualitative thing. It doesn't really drive business as much as people think it would.
So, Alison, what's the point of the Oscar? I mean, you know, it's obviously a cultural laurel. I mean, no one disputes that. It's a great thing to have. Brian Cox has a very funny section in his memoirs where he talks about how his real beef about losing the role of Hannibal Lecter was that he lost the chance of winning an Oscar and therefore having a massively inflated salary. But I don't. You see, I'm interested in that because I wouldn't have thought that necessarily follows, does it? That if you win an Oscar, suddenly your salary your fee as an actor is doubled. Is that right?
I think you can push for your quote to go up. I mean, when I'm doing an actor's contract, they'll still have. And writers and directors, everyone will have awards bonuses, so they know they're going to get an extra cat. But for the next movie, I think it will factor. I think probably less so than it did in the past. I think in the past you would probably have been able to really, maybe double your salary or something because of winning an Oscar. But I think now you just get a little bit of a bump rather than.
It's interesting because, again, for all the kind of opprobrium that's piled on the Oscars, I noticed that in every trailer I see, Oscar nominee Javier Bardem or Oscar winner, whoever it is, still comes up. So obviously people involved in the selling of films still think that it has some value, correct?
Yeah, and I think it does. I think you're both right because it still does, but not nearly as much as it used to. I think it's proportionally much less than in the past, but that doesn't mean it has no value at all. it still has value. And I think it's still, films, you still want your movie to be nominated, both because of it's personally very affirming, but secondly, because I mean, that's why the studios spend lots of money. They don't spend lots of money because they want you to be personally affirmed. They're spending lots of money because they think it's going to increase the box office and help the film wash its face or make some cash.
Could we go to Angie now, who I think wanted to defend Network, which is always a... hi, Angie. How are you?
Hi.
Far away.
Oh. Hi. Can you hear me?
I can, absolutely.
Oh,
I was
okay.
just intrigued by your defence in the chat of Network, and would love to hear more on that.
Well, it's come up. I've thought about it recently in recent times. I mean, it's just Peter Finch. You know, the whole thing of getting everyone to throw their televisions out of the window, and come and sort of mass protest about how manipulated we are. And I just thought it's just a brilliant sort of take on that whole industry, really.
I mean, we should say this is a film in which Peter Finch plays a broadcaster who becomes unhinged, stroke messianic, and attacks the whole system of the media via the media. And you feel that has a particular resonance now, do you?
Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, that we're always questioning how manipulated, or I'm always questioning how manipulated I am or not, and how mad I am, how mad it's making me.
And it's a very
which I think, in a way, the actor...
Yes, go on.
Sorry. No.
Well, I was just going to say it's a film people are still watching obsessively, I suspect, more than they're watching Rocky.
Yes. Well, do you think, actually? Because
yes,
Rocky...
I think people watch the Rocky sequels rather than the original Rocky more now.
Oh, okay.
When Rocky became a superhero, he really became box office. But that's a whole other conversation.
I'd
like to go to my colleague, Phoebe Davis now. Phoebe, thank you very much.
So this is a question, I guess, more about the streaming platforms. I think Apple is really interesting because I think about like View and like walking into a View and like how it feels and the time that's spent curating that space is that if you use streaming platforms is that they are all very different. Amazon is horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Horrible how?
Just to navigate, to find a film, to understand. They repeat information about 50 times on it. It says Amazon Original about 30 times before you actually get anywhere. It's kind of a mess to get around. You have all the accessories of Amazon on top of it as well. So I saw a video actually of someone who tried who kind of redesigned it just for fun. And to make it more usable as a platform. And I'd say the same for Apple. It's quite a hard platform to use. You're not really sure how to find films, and you know, Netflix has its own faults. So the reason I say that is because this is how this is the kind of the cinema, right? That's how you're kind of walking into the space, and you necessarily don't have the smell of popcorn and like the other bits that come with it. But I wonder how much, you know, if Apple do win, like how much time is being spent on it, because I think Amazon have produced some great like films, some great TV shows, but as a platform I find it so unusable that maybe that's our new kind of cinema space, right? Like that's maybe will come from this and winning the Oscars. But I was interested to know if you've kind of noticed that.
It is an interesting point, though. It really is. I mean, the UX, I agree with you, the UX on Amazon is absolutely dreadful.
Mad since they invented the concept.
They invented the yes.
Experience and defined the standard.
No, absolutely.
The problem they have, and the problem that all the subscription companies have, is how do you know what to watch? When you watch a movie in a cinema, you know it's gone through a lot of screening, and because they're spending a lot of money on it, and you know, at that point it goes onto a big screen. With the subscription services, it reminds me a little bit of, you know, when I first moved over here from Canada, there were 4 TV channels, and that suddenly became 100, 150 overnight. And I can remember I would sit there and spend 25 minutes channel surfing and then go to bed. You know, and I kind of feel like that a little bit with Netflix right now. Unless someone's actually said to you, you got to watch this show, it's incredible, you don't watch it, you know, and you surf through it and you don't know. And it's hard to really know. And that's why I think part of the future is going to be curated. And I love what Mubi do, M-U-B-I, and because they actually have someone go through and say, you got to watch this movie, and they recommend a movie every day. And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at probably doing one screen in our cinemas, in every single cinema, which will be a curated one. And you've got to build up audiences' trust, because it's a little bit, for anyone who flew BA for a while, Jonathan Ross had his hidden gems. And when Jonathan Ross said, you got to see this British film, it's really good, it usually was really good. And I think if you build up that trust with your customer, then you can pull out all these films, because there's going to be so much content in the future. I mean, there's more content being produced right now than there ever has been in history. And I think the whole industry, and something we're doing at the BFI, the whole industry is trying to keep up with talent and skills and everything else, which we're behind right now. But there's going to be so much content, and it's how do you get through all of that? And I think the future is going to be 2 channels, one in-home and one out-of-home. And I think cinemas are going to be about high-quality content, high-quality TV, and high-quality films as well.
Can I just bring Alison in? I'd love to know what your thoughts are on what, if you like, might be called the tyranny of the algorithm, which is that, my Netflix feed is it's kind of shambolically based on things I've watched before, but it misses the point. It's like having a very, very unsatisfactory conversation with someone you don't really know. And I know my tastes are low grade, but Christ, they're not that bad. It's actually interesting to me how poor the algorithm is, and how unambitious it is. I suppose that would be my real criticism, which is it doesn't drive the best towards me. It drives stuff towards me which is like what I've already watched, which doesn't strike me as a very creative way of programming.
No, it's not very challenging, is it? Exactly. I mean, the trouble with the algorithms is that they do exactly that. Often, if you've gone out for Chinese food one night, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to go out for Chinese food the next night. You want something different, and it doesn't incorporate that very human desire for difference. It replicates the experience rather than challenges that have done something different. And I think that's. It's strange, the algorithms, because on one hand, when Netflix first came along as a producer, I thought it was so brilliant to be able, because something with movies, because you're aiming for such a broad audience all the time. That's how the whole star system came into place, because you want to create a really big audience. Whereas with Netflix, you would go to see them about a particular project and expect them to want a big star, and they'd say no, because of the algorithms, and we're able to reach these sections. If you're making a sci-fi film, we just want an actor that people who like sci-fi will have heard of. Or if you're making an art movie, we need a feminist art movie. We need people that the feminist art movie lovers will like. So you don't have to have these huge stars. And I love that idea, but in effect, as it's kind of boiled down, and the algorithms just work in that kind of unchallenging way, it's become a sort of anodyne process.
All categories that are meaningless, like sci-fi movies for people with allergies. It doesn't mean anything, and yet here they come. Liz, you look like you were about to dispense wisdom. Please do.
Not wisdom at all, but
Liz Mosley.
The first thing I wonder is, I'm enormously frustrated and often offended by what is displayed to me on Netflix or played to me in my Elizabeth Mosley's radio station,
yes.
Apple Music.
Who do
How
they think
dare
they
you
are?
play
How
Five?
dare you?
Disgusting. I think that is one of the reasons why the Oscars itself, and it's very trendy, isn't it, to say, oh, it's meaningless and silly and nobody cares. But it is a helpful way to navigate. I don't really know where to start, but I'll go and see one that was up for Best Picture, because how bad can it be? And I think that is if you're not a buff, like in my case. But I'd love to know, when you said about the one of the movies on one of the screens would be a curated one, do you mean that you would go to the pictures but you wouldn't know what film it would be until it started? Is that what that...
Well, we've done that too.
That's fun.
We've done that too.
I'd love
we've done that too. And that was the real trust us. But it'll be... We don't have the final model yet, because we're just evolving it right now. We're going to be probably launching it within the next few months. But it'll either be upfront, this is something that you need to see, and it might be an older film as well. It might be a foreign film, it might be kind of an independent or a British film. So it's kind of wide open. It's just, this is something you need to see, you know, and because there's so many great films out there, and and that's why the kind of the curated side of it, someone actually going through, and you know, going back to the Oscars, that is what the Oscars do, and to your point, which I agree with, but that's only a handful of films, right? This is for a whole year or longer, and that's what we're planning on doing. And we're also looking at having kind of like almost like a guest editor for a magazine, where we'll have somebody come in and actually curate it. And we've already had discussions with a few well-known directors in the UK, and just say, look, here's a screen for a month, you know, put the best films in there that you think people should see, and having a run like that. So we're looking at a whole bunch of different scenarios like that, because we're trying to branch out to show more films right now. And I mean, like, why wouldn't you want to also watch something like Game of Thrones or Queen's Gambit, you know, on Tuesday nights or something going forward? I mean, high quality content like that deserves to be seen, and we're social beings, and you know, even watching something like that, you know, collectively and socially, it's a better experience than at home when the doorbell rings with another Amazon package, you know. So it's
a point that's made 1,000 times, but it can't be made too often, which is, I took my younger son to see The Godfather on the big screen. He'd seen it, I think, 6 or 7 times on TV.
Did you make him go 6 times, Matt?
No, he'd watched it voluntarily 6 times. So there was no. I mean, I would be quite willing to make my children go and see The Godfather. I think it's part of their education. But the interesting thing was we went to see it at the Prince Charles in 4K, and he said it was a totally different experience. You know, and the subtleties you saw, as well as the beauty of the cinematography in its full dimensions was brilliant. My colleague Tessa Murray, I think, is straining at the leash to speak. Tessa. How are you? There she is. give us both barrels.
Straining at the leash. That's the power of this dog, Matt. Anyway, sorry.
I was setting you up. I mean, it was kind of
and I dunked it.
Straight man, right? Okay.
I dunked it. Right.
All right.
Couple of points. One, I completely agree with all the stuff about the streaming platforms and the sort of, you know, with the whiff of straight to video they've all got about them. But Tim, the social experience of being in a cinema is so imperative. So for the love of God, please can you stop selling nachos and crisps? So that's just a personal plea, because whatever the pleasure of being in your cinema is really dissipated by the guy behind me troughing down on a massive platter of nachos. But I'm actually interested overall in the, you know, the sort of the future and the health of the film industry, and what the, this isn't a question, Matt, kind of is, what the pros and cons of streaming versus cinema, you know, who's really bringing the bucks, and who's got the funding to maintain sort of investment into film, and what's really happening on that front, because I don't really know.
Where are the revenues? I mean, are they multiple, or have they changed, the revenue streams, Alison?
Yeah, they've changed beyond recognition.
So what's the future?
I don't know. I wish I knew. I mean, it's a crazy landscape out there, and everyone's scratching their heads about what's going to happen, and even what you should make. I mean, you know, it's been so particularly confusing because it's post-COVID, but this year just nothing obeyed any rules. All the films that were even in just limited runs, like Power of the Dog, whatever, the ones that got critically acclaimed did terrible business, and the only film that got critically mauled, which was House of Gucci, did really good business. So I was like, what?
Record. It's absolutely,
but it got
tremendous. You know, it got a kicking because it was loud and camp and outrageous and everything it should have been.
It had zero effect on who went to see it, whereas all the ones that got critically lauded, you know, the opposite. So it sort of leaves you scratching your head about what people want to see, what they want to make, and as a producer, how the hell are you going to get these things funded? Because people are losing money hand over fist on the kind of movies that I'm accustomed to making, because they're not working anymore in cinemas.
So what do you think on that question of the future financial model?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined the industry 30 years ago, you had a theatrical release, then there was typically a 4 to 6 month window, and there would be either a rental or a sell-through for DVDs. and then there was 3 or 4 platforms beyond that, which would go into pay TV, and ultimately in terrestrial TV 18, 24 months later. So there was this kind of tried and tested way of generating income for your film. And that was just completely turned upside down when the internet came, and then when digital came completely. And that's why I think the future is going to be a theatrical release. We've seen in the last 2 years what's happened to the industry when cinemas were taken out of the equation. It was devastating. And the studios didn't lose tens of millions, they lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And we're suddenly the studio's best friend now, again. And we've got probably the best relationship with studios now that we've had in a very long time, collectively as an industry. And I think the important part is you know, the industry wasn't broken. I mean, and if you look at 2019, $43 billion global box office. I mean, it was third consecutive record-breaking year, extraordinary. And then you know, we fell off a cliff and closed for basically 2 years collectively. And the industry is now opening up again. You know, we saw here with Bond what can happen. Bond last October, biggest month in history in the UK. Spider-Man passed Avatar in the UK, third highest grossing film of all time. Passed Avatar in the US, third highest grossing film of all time. The audiences are there. So the models right now, I think, the theatrical release window, which is the length of time between the theatrical release and when it goes into subscription service now, either on a pay or subscription, is 45 days. And that's something that everyone's comfortable with. And that opens a lot of doors for the subscription services. So I think you're going to see Netflix films, Amazon films, Apple films on cinemas this year. That's the prediction.
Very interesting. I'd love to come to my colleague, Tomini, who I think is online. Hi, Tomini.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, hi. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good to see you. I think you had a point to make about comedy, which struck me as really quite an important one, actually.
Yeah, so people in the chat were just saying how they feel like comedy often gets overlooked at an award show like the Oscars. But I think it's in a lot of the movies that get top billing sort of get put forward for the top awards are made as Oscar bait movies. And I don't think, I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think a lot of comedy films get made with the Oscars in mind. But if you gave that to a director who thought, you know, I can make a comedy that can get Best Picture, maybe they could do it. But I also think the films that get at least a nomination, they kind of are comedy drama films or sci-fi comedy. I don't think the ha-ha element of a comedy is enough to win, but we have seen comedy-esque movies get to the top or close to it.
Question, isn't it? I mean, because if you just off the top of my head, I mean, I guess the artist just sort of crosses the line as a comedy.
But that would be a comedy.
But that would be a comedy art house. Then Forrest.
Is there any? I'd like to ask
Were you
her.
thinking of? Yeah.
Is there a comedy movie that she thinks should have won an Oscar?
Go back to our list.
And
Sorry, Matt. Sorry, I was just going to say.
and Mark Sadandri, our Glorious Thinking programmer.
Well, just on the comedy point, if you do a quick scan through nominations and winners of the 4 big performance categories, comedy doesn't really appear until you go to Best Supporting Actress. That's where they all start to appear, and it's very rarely in the male categories. But once you look into the Best Supporting Actress and Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress, particularly sort of up until about the sort of 2000s, that's where all the comedy films are. So
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go back to Annie Hall, which is a long. But I can't think of Forrest Gump. Probably is on the cusp between drama and comedy. But Tomini's right. I mean, it's
25 plus years. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been a long time.
Why is that?
I mean, we need comedy now. I mean, no,
Do we
do.
ever? Yeah, I know, but
I mean, we're coming out of this dark period, and there's all these dark movies and programs, and you know, we don't need another Scandi noir. We need a nice Meg Ryan romantic comedy. and there, you know, there's been a few come
The Seventh
out.
Seal, the musical, is what we're talking about. Okay.
No, we
Wild
need that
strawberries! Exclamation mark! Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's true, but I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because it's not as if there's been a shortage of comic content, and some of it brilliant. But it
Sideways, you might say, was a comedy.
7 comedy winners all told.
All I can find.
That's amazing. That's amazing, and probably diminishingly so in recent years. Paul Atherton, I think you wanted to chip in, one of our most stalwart and valued members. Good to see you, Paul.
Thank you. I was just thinking about the ceremony itself, actually. I think one of the things I feel that we've lost in the Oscars is that sort of gravitas and the grandeur of the event. And I think part of that has come because it's, again, one of those things that gets televised. People go, hello, I've got an Oscar, and they cry, and they go, and that's your end of it. Whereas you kind of see some of the theatrical things where they bring on a whole cast of people and the musicals, and they stage it as if it's an event. And I think I'd like to see that back. I'd like to see the glamour come back to it, the old style Hollywood glamour come back to the Oscars, and making it an event. And therefore, by definition, whether it's being streamed or whether we're seeing it on television, because I think part of the problem often is that we talk about television audiences, but actually a lot of people are still watching it. They're just not watching it in the numbers on television anymore. But actually to have that event, I remember being in London a few years ago when sort of Oscar parties were the in thing. And every nightclub and every sort of venue were like, you have to dress up, you have to come out, and you have to be drinking, and it'll be on the big screens, and everybody's just having a great time. And I think if they started bringing all that back, and that sort of having an immersive experience about going to the Oscars, I think they could revive at least the notion of the ceremony, regardless of sort of the nominations on posters and things. Which
It's a great point, because the Oscars seem to me to have lost some of their fun in just the great song and dance fun. You know, now you have Joaquin Phoenix comes on and tells you that you've got to eat twigs and fruit that is asked to be picked, and then sort of wanders off. And I'm sure he's right, but it's not necessarily the most joyous way to spend an evening. I mean, has some of the sheer joy and fun been drained from what is, after all, an entertainment event? I mean, the Oscars ceremony, for all the seriousness behind it, is an entertainment event, isn't it?
Yes, but I don't know that that's necessarily just the fault of the Oscars. I think that's awards
Cultural.
in general and culture in general, that now people can't behave badly in public in the way that they used to be able to. I mean, the Golden Globes was always famous for being the fun event before the Oscars. You know, and I remember when I went to, well, in fact, the year that we had Elizabeth, there was a comedy, Something About Mary, was also in the awards race that year. And
now you're talking.
I remember that everyone involved with Something About Mary was off their nut at the Golden Globes. And they were throwing stuff at I remember them going, Shakespeare in Love, that wasn't freaking funny, and it's throwing another, like, and but we were all having, it was hilarious, but you wouldn't, I mean, that if anyone tried to have that kind of fun, they wouldn't. They'd have been marched out of town by the time the Oscars came.
I mean, presumably everyone on Sunday will be wearing blue and yellow, which will be fine for the first 3 hours, and then it might get a bit. Not least for Ukrainian viewers who are presumably tuning in for a little bit of relief. I mean, do you think we've got to po-face, Tim?
Well, no, I'm just reflecting. I agree with the fun side. I think of Roberto Benigni, jumping over the seats to get his award, and
then Tom Stoppard going, I'm like him. I feel like him on the inside.
Oh, well, that was great stuff. But the Oscars are too long, too many awards, too many commercials, and I think the BAFTAs are a lot more fun, and I think when you're actually at the Oscars, every 5 minutes there's a commercial break, and the lights come on, everybody walks around, and then it goes back again, and you don't see that as a viewer, but you still have all these breaks as a viewer, and I think if they made it tighter. And also, I think it is becoming more diverse, and it has to be, because I think that will also appeal to audiences and younger audiences as well. And so I think it's slowly getting there, but it's got a ways to go. I mean, you look at their viewership, and it's been going, steadily downhill now for every year. And but I think they just need to shorten it and tighten it up a little bit. And you're right, get some fun back in.
Okay, we're running out of time. I just want to put you on the spot, both of you, and ask each of you best picture, best actor, best actress. So, Alison, predictions for this year.
I really think it's I mean, we all know it's between Coda and Pound of the Dog.
Yeah.
If I had to bet, a large amount of money on it, I would put it on Coda.
And best actor.
But you're talking what I think is going to win or what I would want to win?
No, what's going to win? This is bookies rather than
I think it's
taste.
super close, and it could be either. But if I had to put, if you were holding a gun to my head and I had to put 100k on it, I'd put it on Coda.
Best actor?
But who's up for best actor again? I can't remember.
Will Smith, Denzel.
I'm going for Will Smith.
Will Smith. And actress? Penelope Cruz. Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
The obvious person I'm forgetting, which is... My brain is going...
Nicole Kidman, Jessica Chastain.
Jessica Chastain for the Eyes of Tammy Faye.
Yeah, I mean, I actually love Nicole in Being the Ricardos. I think she's much overlooked and underestimated. She's terrific in it. I think it's probably going to be Jessica Chastain.
So do I, yes. Tim?
Very similar. I loved Being the Ricardos. I thought it was an extraordinary film. I know. It was so overlooked. Going full circle back to the injustices of what should have been done earlier, but I think it is going to be Coda, and I think Coda probably ultimately deserves it.
Best actor?
Best actor. Well, I mean, Will Smith was extraordinary. I mean, he's always good, but I thought he really, yeah. So I think I would have to go for Will Smith too. I think.
And best actress?
Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman.
I thought Nicole Kidman's. I thought her Lucy, and I grew up with it in North America, and my earliest memories were my grandparents absolutely loved the show, and I kind of watched it from a very early age, and I thought she just absolutely was amazing.
But do you think she's going to win it? I mean, I know you want her to win it. I want her to win it, but I don't think she will.
I actually think she could be a dark horse in it because there's a lot of.
See, this is why this is going to be such an exciting Oscars.
Yeah.
Sadly, we've run out of time. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I've learned a great deal, particularly about, I think, looking forward. So much work to be done taught us about the growing power of the streaming giants as studios, as participants, not just participants, but dominating forces in the entertainment industry. And I'm hugely grateful to Tim and Alison for coming on and really directing the discussion in such an amusing and informed way. And to all of you for coming along, and to everyone online, to you too. And we resume on Monday, do we not, Mark? I believe.
Monday, yes.
Monday, yes. So we'll see you in the meantime. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you very much for coming.